friends, and welcome back. My name is Deepa from DeeZinesByD, and today I have another Scrappy Tails post for you today. So today I'm sharing a card that I made where I focused on all of the tiny little dies that come in the coffee shop add-on from the last release from Scrappy Tails. Now you can see that this card features a ton of beautiful little cups and teapots and coffee makers and espresso makers. And what I really wanted to do was take a bigger look at the set and kind of an in-depth look and look at all of the little dies that come with these sets. Sabrina does a really good job of making sure that you have all of the little things that you're going to need. And I just really wanted to focus on the little bits to make my card background. So as I mentioned, we're using the coffee shop add-on die set, and I have it right here. You can see there are tons of dies. There's so many dies, I can't even count how many. And there's some of them I haven't even used, and a lot of the ones that I haven't used are these tiny ones. So you can see there's some little cupcakes, a couple milk bottles, teacups, coffee cups, cappuccino cups. We got like an iced coffee cup there and actual takeout cups. There's so many different little pieces here. And I thought that I could use these tiny little pieces to create a beautiful background. So the first thing I do is I look up a color scheme, and I chose a bunch of I guess you could say pinks and purples along with some grays. And I decided that I was going to use my scrap white cardstock. So I have a ton of pieces of scrap white cardstock, especially for making card bases. And what I do is once I've got my color scheme, I match up inks based on the color scheme I find, usually online. And then I color them just like this. So I just basically take my ink pads and apply them to the scraps to get the colored cardstock that I want. And then once I've got all of my beautiful colors and the beautiful color scheme that I've chosen, like what I've got here, then all I have to do is kind of die cut all of my little pieces out of these. So I like to do this using my Scenic sidekick. I just find that it comes in handy for me because I can kind of just use it on my tabletop, and I can kind of put on a show that I like, and I just kind of push this through my die cutting machine as many times as I need to, especially with all these little pieces. I colored about 5 or 6 strips of cardstock here, and I only really used half of each, so I didn't really need too much of that cardstock in order to get all of the pieces that I needed to create this background. So I just pull them all off of my die cutting plate. I usually use my little pick here to kind of take them off because they do get stuck, and I just cut them all of these little pieces out of all of the different colors. Now when I got to the grays, I tried to pick things that would be more gray, like for example the coffee machines or the espresso maker. And then I always like to add a metallic cardstock to create some shine. So this time I've chosen some Sizzix Opulent Silver Mirror cardstock, and so you can see I've got all of the things cut out of the different colors along with that silver. Now, my main focal point on my card is going to be this cute little stand, this chalkboard stand. And I like this because it works well with the storefront sentiment set, which you see here. There's all of these little sentiments, and there's like a few of them that actually fit perfectly on this little chalkboard. So I've got this one here that I'm actually going to heat emboss onto that chalkboard. That's part of the reason why I used the darker color of cardstock for this little piece. And I've stamped it out with the embossing ink there, Versamark, and I'm using some Hero Arts fine white detail embossing powder here. Now you can see my stamp is not 100% uniform. So once I've heat embossed this, you can see there's a little bit of, there's bits of the letters that are kind of missing. So I do have a little trick for this, and that is the Sakura Jelly Roll pen. So I just take this in one of the finer tips, and I just kind of fill in all of those pieces of the letter that didn't actually get any embossing powder on it. And it just kind of fixes those little mistakes and makes your sentiment more legible. So once that's done, all I have to do is I'm using these small little foam squares, and I'm just going to attach that actual chalkboard piece to that little stand just to give it a bit of dimension, and that's going to be the main focal part of my card. Now I have to do a whole bunch of paper piecing work, and that's mainly because I created all of these little shadows. So the first thing I've got here is the little coffee pot. Now there's a coffee maker, and then there's actually a separate die which cuts out another coffee pot for you. So that's where I got the little pink coffee pot from. And now I'm just going to stick it onto that mirror cardstock in a little bit of an offset fashion, and that just creates a cute little outline behind the image, which creates a bit of shine and just makes your little die cut stand out a little more. Now, I like doing this. It takes a little bit of extra time, but that little bit of extra time is what makes all of these tiny little die cuts pop out on your background. So I do recommend doing it because you will notice a big difference between this and just using the die cut on its own. Now, I do that with all of the little pieces. So I've got all of the little coffee cups, you've got like mugs, you've got cappuccino cups, and there's actually this little round piece here, which is, I would assume, the actual coffee portion of your mug. I didn't put that on all of my mugs, but I put it on some. Now for the actual cupcakes, you can see they actually have separate dies for the little icing that goes on top. I was a little too lazy to cut those out, so I actually just took the cupcake and cut off the top, and then I had just attached the bottom to another cutout or die cut cupcake. So you can do it this way. You can use the little piece that goes on top, do whatever works for you. I didn't actually notice it until later, and then I thought, you know what, I already cut these out already. I'm sure I can do it with what I have. So here's a little teapot, and there's just so many little pieces you can hear. I've put them all together, and once put together, you can see how that little bit of mirror cardstock behind just enhances the look of those little pieces. Now, in order to put together something like this, like where you're making a background, you kind of need some frame dies. So first of all, I've got some Pink Fresh Studio Folk Edge circles. I cut one of those out from some white cardstock. And then I've got this Altenew Fancy Frames set. So this cuts out a bunch of rectangles. And I only need one of these. I think the biggest size is a little too big, so I'll get the second largest rectangle. And I can actually attach that to this piece of peach or blush cardstock that I have here. And this is just some Recollections cardstock, which I've picked up from Michael's. And you can see that this border fits perfectly. So I'm just going to use my Barely Arts glue and attach this to the edge. So I had kind of arranged my die cut pieces onto this piece of cardstock by itself, but I thought that it wasn't enough. So that's why I went ahead and cut out the frame, and it really just enhanced the look of the card. Now for the focal point, I have that folk edge circle, and I've attached now that chalkboard stand, and I'm finding my little sentiment here again from the Storefront Sentiment stamp set. And it's just a cute little friend sentiment. And this is a nice card for a friend to say, hey, I miss you. Let's get together and have a cup of coffee. It's just a cute little card. And I find that the little color scheme that I've done it in it makes it all kind of come together and kind of coordinate and look nice. So that's all I find that you have to do to make your cards kind of more cohesive and have a bit more of a professional look, if that's what you're going for. I love having a color scheme to work with because it takes kind of the thinking out of the colors that you're using, plus it really just comes together. So you can see I've attached that circle with some foam. It's just some leftover foam. Again, this is how I use up a lot of my scraps. So you see I'm using up my scrap white cardstock. I'm using up my scrap foam. This is a great card just to kind of, once you made all your main cards and you got all extra stuff left over, you can kind of just use this to put stuff together. Now I'm going to go ahead and place all of these little pieces around my background. So this is probably, I think, besides the die cutting and assembling, takes a bit of time, but not that much. I think this is the fun part because once you've cut everything out and pieced everything together, now you get to finally do the artsy part where it's like you're kind of figuring out where you want to put all your pieces. Now, I tried to prop some of these bigger pieces up with some foam. This again adds a bit of dimension. Now, I don't know if you could tell from the video, but the foam that I use to prop up the center circle is actually a bit thicker than these little foam squares that I'm using for the pieces. That way, if I attach these little die cut pieces, I can kind of tuck some a bit underneath that circle to create more of a cohesive background. So one of the things I think that's important when you're doing a background like this is to have some pieces that are hanging off the edge. So you can see I actually cut a straight edge off the edge of that cup and added it to the bottom so that it kind of looked like, this was one full border, and I just kind of cut the panel down. And I'm going to keep doing this around the edges of this panel, and I find that it really completes the panel. It makes it look a little different, and a little different in the sense that it looks a bit better. I mean, It's up to you. I mean, everyone has their own idea of what looks good. So for me, this works. You might not want to do this and find that your card looks just as well by itself. So now I've added a couple of these little die cuts in that center circle there. I thought that it was just a little too plain and a little too big not to have any of all these little pieces on it. So I added a little takeaway coffee cup and a little mug there. And now I'm just adding a few more extra pieces just to fill in that background. Now, before I fully complete the card, I do want to attach it to the card base. So I folded over a white card base, which is an A2 size side folding card base. And it's in the portrait orientation, as is my panel. I'm just going to attach it with a bit of glue here. And my panel was cut down to actually, I think it was 4 inches by, it was a little smaller than 4¼ by 5½. And then I added that border on top. So I still have a tiny little bit of a white border peeking out behind there. Then I've taken these beautiful nail art gems that I tend to use as embellishments on everything. They're just from Amazon. You can kind of just search nail art gems and it kind of comes up, and they're pretty cheap. They're not too expensive, and there's a ton of them in different sizes. And I really like the fact that there's some really small sizes for these. So these smaller sizes work for these little details I'm adding, like to the bottom of the chalkboard stand there. And then I also added a whole bunch as just like little accents on top of the die cuts, a little gem here and there. And then I also added some gems throughout the background, which I thought really kind of brought it all together. It may look like a little bit much to you. You may choose not to add them if you don't want to, but I like the look of it and I love the shine. So you can see that those smaller gems come in handy for putting on the die cuts, and the larger gems come in handy for filling in the background. And if you didn't want to use gems, like you think you have enough shine on your card, you could instead maybe use a marker or maybe a dot stamp or something like that, or maybe bits of confetti. Maybe you want to use some sequins. Anything would work, and it would just kind of I feel like the dots, they just really bring everything together because it just kind of looks like sparkles and sprinkle kind of in the background. Now, that's my final card. You can see there's a whole bunch of dimensions. Some of them are placed flat on the card, some are raised up with foam, and it just looks really nice in the end. And you can see how that color scheme just all kind of came together once I put everything together on the card. So I hope that you've all been inspired by this card today and that you maybe have an urge to make something similar yourself. As always, all of the products have been linked within my blog, which is linked in the description below. And I hope that you all have liked my video. If you have, please give me a like and subscribe. Hit the notification bell for future videos. And I hope to see you all again next time. Have a great day, guys. Bye.